My name is Victoria Lynch. I'm 35 years old. 2 nights ago, my brother Garrett blackened my left eye with a closed fist in his house in Westerville. This afternoon, my father stood me up in his living room in front of 22 relatives and said, "On your knees. Now." He said I had embarrassed the family. He said I owed my brother an apology. He read the words out loud first so I'd say them exactly right. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't look at my mother, who was already looking at the carpet. I knelt on my father's hardwood floor. I said every word he gave me. Then I set my phone on the floor in front of him, screen up, and pressed play on what I'd recorded in my brother's house 40 hours earlier. What none of them knew was that the recording wasn't the worst thing waiting in that room. If your stomach just dropped, take 1 second to like and subscribe. These stories only find the people who need them when you do. And drop your city and the time you're watching in the comments. I'm Victoria Lynch. This is the story of how I knelt on my father's living room floor in front of 22 relatives and got back up free. Let me start with the week before that Sunday. Thursday morning, the week before the baptism. I made coffee, black, double strong, while my daughter Hazel argued with her backpack zipper at the kitchen table. She was 7, which meant she negotiated everything like she was being deposed. "Mr. Pemberton has anxiety," she said. "He needs me at school." Mr. Pemberton was a stuffed rabbit her father had given her 3 weeks before he died. She knew the story by heart. "He has the couch and a window," I said. "He'll be fine." She gave me the sigh of a woman much older than 7 and accepted his house arrest. We lived in a small ranch house in Clintonville, on the north side of Columbus, Ohio. We shared it with an orange cat named Walter and a fridge covered in magnets from every state Daniel and I had visited before he died. There was a framed photo on the kitchen shelf. Daniel in our hospital room, holding Hazel 3 hours old, hair still wet, laughing like a man who couldn't believe he'd been allowed this much. "Mom?" Hazel said, swinging her legs. "Why do you always braid your hair before you brush your teeth?" "Because if my hair is loose, the coffee wins." She filed the answer away with a small nod. She was a child who collected explanations the way other kids collected stickers. My phone buzzed in my blazer pocket when we were halfway to her school. The screen said, "Dad." I always picked up. 45 years of doing what Roland Kessler tells you is not a habit you break by accident. Victoria. Not Vicky. Never Vicky. "I'm calling about Sunday. The baptism. I'll be there. Father needs to know you're coming." When he said father, he meant himself in the third person, the way pulpit men do. "We're family. Even when family disappoints us, we show up." I said I'd be there. A pause. Not an empty one. "And we'll need to talk about the other thing on Sunday." "What other thing?" "You know what other thing." He hung up first. He always hung up first. I dropped Hazel at school in the second line of cars, watched her wave Mr. Pemberton at me through the window. She'd snuck him in after all, and drove downtown. Whitlock and Vance Family Law occupied the 11th floor of a building on East Broad. I'd been a senior paralegal there for 9 years. Most of what I did was organize other people's worst weeks of life into binders. Bridget Halloran was at the coffee station when I came in. 41, divorced once, smarter than 2 of the partners combined. "You look like you got bad news," she said. "I got my dad." "Same thing." She handed me a coffee and a fresh yellow legal pad. She always did that on days I came off the elevator like I'd been preached at. Some people use yoga. I use blank paper. The morning's file was a client named Erin Whitaker. Husband had punched her in front of their toddler in February. She had documented every incident going back 4 years in a small olive-colored notebook. She had come into our conference room the week before and set the notebook on the table like she was returning a library book. "The women who keep notebooks," I said quietly. "They always stop crying first." That's because they ran out of tears years before they ran out of evidence. Bridget looked at me a beat too long. Vic, you doing okay? I said yes. I said sure. I said it the way you say it when you mean, don't ask the second time. She didn't, but she moved her chair half a foot closer to mine for the rest of the morning. That was Bridget. That night, I tucked Hazel in under her blanket with the constellation pattern. She held Mr. Pemberton against her chin. Mom, she said, why doesn't Grandpa Roland ever talk about Dad? I thought about it. Because your dad didn't fit the kind of family Grandpa Roland believes in. Then what's a family? The person who stands next to you when you aren't the best version of yourself. She thought for a long moment. Then she said, then Grandpa Roland isn't my family. I didn't answer. I turned off the lamp. April 12th, 2022. A Tuesday. Daniel was driving home from a conference in Cincinnati on Interstate 71. There was a thunderstorm, the kind Ohio gets in April when the air can't make up its mind. A semi-truck driver fell asleep at the wheel just south of London. Daniel's pickup was the third car in a chain. The state trooper called at 11:43 at night. I remember because I had been watching the clock since 10, when he had texted that traffic was bad and he would be late. I remember 3 sentences from that call. I remember, Mrs. Lynch. I remember, your husband. I remember, I'm so sorry. I do not remember anything else for about 6 hours after that. I have a memory of Hazel, 3.5, sitting up in her bed at 3 in the morning, asking why I was on the floor of her room. I have no memory of getting there. My mother Phyllis came the next afternoon. She brought a casserole. She sat at our kitchen table for 45 minutes. She told me twice that Pastor Whitley from the hospice ministry was praying for us. She told me once that the Lord doesn't give us more than we can carry. When she left, the casserole stayed on the counter for 2 days. I never opened the lid. My father did not call. He sent a card. We held the service at Lynchwood Funeral Home in Columbus. Daniel had grown up Methodist. The pastor was a soft-voiced woman named Reverend Pelletier. She had known Daniel since he was a boy. 2 days before the service, I asked my father if he would say a few words. Daniel's mother had asked me. She thought it would be a kindness. My father said no. He said it in the voice he used for board meetings. He said Daniel had not been a member of Grace Covenant. He said it would be inappropriate for me to speak liturgically over a man outside our covenant. He came to the funeral. He sat in the 3rd pew with my mother. He did not cry. When the casket was carried out, he stood with his hands folded over his King James and looked straight ahead. Daniel's mother put her hand on my arm afterward. She said, "Honey, I want to thank you for asking. That was kind of you. Don't let him forget you asked." I have never told my father that I didn't forget. The first year alone, Hazel asked where Daddy was every night before bed. Sometimes, more than once. The grief counselor said this was normal. She said children that age think death is reversible. I learned to answer without crying. Daddy went on a long trip. He doesn't come back. But he loved you a whole lot. And we keep his pictures and we talk about him so we remember. She would nod every time. Then she would ask again 3 nights later. I went back to work after 6 weeks. Bridget covered every file I touched for 2 months. The partners gave me the cases where the husband had died and the wife was suddenly trying to figure out probate. They thought it would feel useful. Some weeks it did. Some weeks I came home and sat in the car in my driveway for 40 minutes before I could go inside. My brother Garrett sent flowers on the 1-month mark. The card said, "From the Kessler family." He did not visit. He told my mother on a phone call I overheard at Christmas that he didn't know what to say to her about it. That was 2022. He was 34, a grown man. The thing about my mother is that she had a way of saying terrible things in the kindest voice you ever heard. The summer Hazel was 4, we drove out to Worthington for my mother's birthday. After cake, she took Hazel into the guest room to show her some old photo albums. On the way back from the bathroom, I heard her say to my daughter, in the same gentle tone she used for prayers, "Some marriages don't get to be held inside the Lord's house, sweetie. That's not your fault." Hazel was 4. She didn't understand the sentence. She nodded the way kids do when adults say things that sound important. I walked into the guest room. I picked up my daughter. I drove us home. When my mother called the next day to ask why we'd left without saying goodbye, I told her I had a headache. I told her I would call her when I felt better. I did not call. I waited for her to ask what she had said wrong. She never did. We made it through 3 more Thanksgivings. 1 Christmas Eve service my father insisted on, 2 cousin baptisms, and Hazel's first kindergarten Christmas pageant before Thanksgiving of 2025. By then, Garrett and his wife Maddie had been separated for almost 2 years. The story I had been told, by my mother, by my father in his sermons, by my cousin Marlo at the Easter brunch, was always the same. Maddie had walked out. Maddie was unstable. Maddie had abandoned her covenant. Maddie was the one who had broken the family. I had no reason to doubt this. I had not been close to Maddie. She had always been quiet at family functions. She had stopped coming to family functions about a year before the separation. I assumed that was because she was checked out of the marriage. That's what people said. My father preached 2 sermons in 2024 about wives who abandon their covenant. He did not say her name. He did not have to. So when we arrived at my parents' house in Worthington on November 27th, 2025, Thanksgiving, and Garrett was there with the kids, but no Maddie. None of us said anything about it. The custody schedule had her with her own family for the holiday. It was understood. It was the new normal. I had no idea what my nephew Jonah was about to say to my daughter on the staircase after pumpkin pie. Up until that moment, I thought I knew who my brother was. When Garrett and Maddie got engaged in the summer of 2012, my father called me and said, in the closest he ever got to happiness, "He's marrying a Sunday school teacher." Maddie was 22 then. Sweet, soft-spoken, taught second-grade Sunday school at Grace Covenant. Her family lived 3 blocks from the church. Everybody loved her. My father called her exactly the kind of girl Garrett needed. He said it the way you describe a vitamin. They got married in July 2013, at the church. 300 people. My mother cried through the whole ceremony. My father gave Maddie a blessing at the reception that everybody said was beautiful. Jonah was born in March 2016. Daphne came 2 years later in February 2018. Garrett posted pictures of them in matching church outfits on Instagram every Easter and every Christmas. The caption said things like, "Blessed beyond measure" and "Our crew." Everybody believed it. I believed it. By the time Daniel died in 2022, Jonah was 6 and Daphne was 4. Garrett brought them once, the week after the funeral, with a Tupperware of his wife's pasta salad. They sat on my living room floor for 45 minutes and ate it. The pasta salad was good. He left. The first thing that struck me as wrong I noticed in May of 2023 at a family dinner for Mother's Day. Maddie spent 40 minutes in the kitchen with my mother. She did not eat. She helped with cleanup before anyone else had finished. When I tried to make conversation with her about Daphne's pre-K, she answered in fragments. She kept her eyes down. I noticed something else. When Garrett raised his voice across the table to call the kids over for dessert, Daphne flinched. I did not say anything about it then. I told myself I was projecting. I was the widow at the table. I was the one who had been studying domestic violence files for 2 years by then. I assumed I was seeing it where it was not. Then, later that evening, I watched Maddie button Daphne's cardigan in the front hall. The sleeve of her own blouse rode up. I saw a yellowing bruise on the inside of her wrist, the shape of a hand, fingers separate. She caught me looking. She covered it with her sleeve. She smiled the smile women smile when they have to convince other women not to ask the question. I did not ask. I told myself it could have been anything. I told myself my own brother would never. Maddie filed for separation in February 2024. My father preached 3 sermons that spring, none of them naming her, all of them naming her. Wives who abandon their covenant, the damage a woman does when she takes her children from their father's house. The story of Lot's wife. What happens when you look back at the world you were called to leave? Family functions became a project of erasing Maddie's existence. My mother stopped saying her name. My father stopped saying her name. Garrett told a long story at a 4th of July barbecue about how he was doing what was best for the kids and how Maddie had issues she wouldn't address. Everybody nodded. Everybody felt sorry for him. I have a memory from that 4th of July. Jonah eating a hot dog on the porch step while Garrett laughed too loud inside. Jonah held the bun with both hands like he was afraid it might escape. He did not look at his father once. Now back to Thanksgiving 2025. My parents' house. 20-something relatives. Pumpkin pie. Football on with the volume low. The kids. Jonah, 10. Daphne, 8. My Hazel, 7. 2 of my cousin Marlowe's. Were playing on the carpeted staircase in the front hall. Out of sight of the adults, but not out of earshot, which is the way kids prefer it. I went into the front hall to get my coat. I needed 5 minutes outside. Family makes me cold even when the heat is on. I heard Hazel ask, in her clear 7-year-old voice, what the small line was on the side of Jonah's neck. The line was a scar, a thin pink one, about 2 inches. Jonah said, very factually, the way kids say things they assume everyone already knows. Dad hits me with the belt sometimes when I break stuff. He said it without performance. He didn't say it like a confession. He said it like a fact about weather. Hazel asked if it hurt. Jonah said yes. Then they moved on to talking about Mr. Pemberton. I had stopped breathing. I do not remember putting on my coat. I do not remember the drive home with Hazel asleep in the back seat. Until that moment, I thought I knew my brother. Pause this for a second. If a child in your life ever told you something the way Jonah told my daughter, flat, factual, like a fact about the weather, tell me in the comments what you did or what you wish you had done. Someone watching this needs to know they aren't the only person who froze in that moment. 3 days later, I was driving Hazel home from her ballet class in Clintonville. It was 38 degrees out. The sun was setting at 4:15, the way Ohio does in late November. She said from the back seat, "Mom, does Uncle Garrett really hit Cousin Jonah with the belt?" I almost drove into the median. I pulled into a Speedway parking lot, put the car in park, turned around. She was holding Mr. Pemberton against her chest, ears down. "Why are you asking me that, baby?" "Because Jonah said it. At Thanksgiving." "What did Jonah say exactly?" She told me. She remembered the exact phrasing. She added, almost as an afterthought, that Jonah had told her not to tell her parents about it because Dad gets mad. I sat in that parking lot for 8 minutes. A man in a Carhartt jacket pumped gas at the pump in front of us, finished, drove away. I watched him without seeing him. I said to Hazel, "I'm going to handle this. You don't need to think about it. But you did the right thing telling me." She said, "Is Uncle Garrett going to go to jail?" I said, "I don't know yet." She thought about it. She said, "Then will Aunt Maddie come to Christmas next year?" I had no answer to that one. I went into the office on Monday. I did not say good morning to anyone. I went straight to Bridget's desk and closed her door behind me. "I need to talk to you, not as colleagues." She didn't ask. She put her coffee down. I told her everything. I told her what Jonah had said. I told her Maddie was Garrett's ex. I told her about my father's sermons, about the family's narrative, about the wrist bruise I had pretended not to see in 2023, about Daphne flinching at the table. When I finished, Bridget was quiet for a moment. She picked up her coffee, took a sip, set it down. "You need to call Maddie, today." "I don't have her number." "I have her cousin Tessa's phone number. Tessa used to be a client. I can put you in touch by end of business. But Vic, you have to be the one to call. Because if a paralegal from her ex's family law firm reaches out, that's 100 kinds of conflict. If you reach out, that's a sister-in-law. There's a difference." "What if she doesn't want to talk to me?" Bridget looked at me. "Then you'll know that too." I called Maddie that night. It went to voicemail. I left a message that was 12 seconds long. Maddie agreed to meet me on a Friday night, December 8th, at Stauf's Coffee in German Village. Neutral ground, public enough. She told me she would come alone, but that her cousin Tessa knew where she was and would be calling her at exactly 8:45 to check in. I told her that was smart. She was 36, quiet, hair pulled back. She wore a cardigan over a blouse and had her hands wrapped around her coffee like she was afraid it might walk away. I said, "Maddie, I need to tell you what Jonah said to my daughter at Thanksgiving." I told her. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she reached down into a tote bag at her feet and pulled out a small olive-colored notebook. Moleskin, worn at the corners. She set it on the table between us. "Entry 1, she said. September 14th, 2020. First time he hit me. He had been drinking. Daphne was 2. Jonah was 4. They were both asleep upstairs." She opened the notebook to the first page. I read it. There were 312 more entries. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask me to believe her. She slid the notebook across the table and let me read. 3 weeks later, my father called me again. "Garrett needs your help on something." "What?" "There's a custody case. He needs a family witness affidavit. About Maddie. About her instability. The judge needs to hear from family." "What kind of affidavit?" "Sworn statement. You'd say what you've observed. Her behavior. Her judgment. Her unfitness as a mother. You're a paralegal. You know the procedure." I said nothing for a moment. I said, "I don't think I can do that, Dad." There was a silence. Then his pulpit voice came on. The one he used for funerals. "Victoria, family is a covenant. We do not break a covenant because it is uncomfortable. Garrett is fighting for his children. You are a single mother. Of all the people in this family, you should understand." He hung up. The next day, my mother started sending me text messages with Bible verses. 3 a week. For the rest of January. In late January, Garrett called me himself. Once. He said, "Just sign the affidavit, Vic. It's a formality. The judge is just trying to check boxes." I told him I needed to think about it. What he did not know, what neither of them knew, was that I had already met Maddie. I had already seen the notebook. I had already taken pictures. Maddie and I started meeting once a week, sometimes at Stauf's, sometimes at a Panera on the west side. Always public. Always brief. Always after I had put Hazel to bed and asked the neighbor to listen for her. She brought the notebook every time. I read entries with her sitting across from me. I took photographs of pages with my phone on a tripod stand Bridget had loaned me. I logged the photos on an encrypted drive at the office under the file name EW Supplemental. Aaron Whitaker, our client. If anyone audited my computer, they would see a familiar pattern. The entries were not what you would call dramatic. That was the thing that made them devastating. Each one was 4 sentences long. Date, time, what Garrett did, what the kids were doing. September 14th, 2020, 11:30 p.m. G slapped me across the mouth when I asked about the bank balance. Kids asleep. Daphne woke up, came downstairs, asked why I was crying. G told her it was a movie. 312 of those. 4 years. She had also kept text messages. She had voice memos. She had a calendar with red marks. She had begun, in 2022, going to a therapist who kept her own paper trail. In March 2026, Jonah's 5th grade counselor, a woman named Mrs. Olson at North Point Elementary, pulled him out of class on a Tuesday morning. He had drawn a picture in art class the week before. The picture was a stick figure with red marks on its back. The caption said, "This is me when Dad is mad." Mrs. Olson was a mandated reporter. By law, she had to call CPS. She did. CPS opened a file on the Kessler-Westerville household on March 20th, 2026. Maddie told me this over coffee the next Saturday. Her voice was lower than usual. "He didn't tell me about the picture. He just drew it in school." "He didn't need to tell you," I said. "He told the people who can do something." She looked at me. "Is that what he was doing?" "That's what he was doing." We sat there for a long minute. She said, "What do we do?" I said, "We file ex parte. Emergency motion. You have evidence. The CPS report is the door." She said, "And then what?" I said, "Then we wait for him to give us the rest." I called in a favor with a paralegal at a different firm. She had access to a public hospital record search. I asked her for any ER admissions on Daphne Kessler. Date of birth February 2018. She found 3. 2 were at Ohio Health Westerville. 1 was at Riverside Methodist. All in the 4 years before Maddie filed for separation. All marked as accidents. A bruised rib at 4 years old. A fractured collarbone at 5.5. A laceration on the chin requiring 4 stitches at 6. Each chart noted that the child was brought in by her father. Each chart noted that the father reported the child had fallen. Once from a coffee table, once from her bike, once from the swing set. Each chart noted no follow-up flag. I told Maddie. She closed her eyes for 15 seconds. Then she said, "I knew about the rib. He told me she had fallen off the couch. I was at my sister's house for the weekend. He never told me about the other 2. He took her in himself." She opened her eyes. "He took her in himself," she said again. "He drove our daughter to the emergency room twice and didn't tell me." Maddie's pro bono attorney was a woman named Linda Esposito at the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. Linda was 62, had been doing this work for 30 years, and had a voice like cooled steel. I met Linda once. She read every page of the Moleskine. She read every page of the ER records. She watched the video of Daphne's interview with the school counselor. She told Maddie, "We file ex parte the Friday before Easter weekend. The courts are slow on Mondays. We get the order before he can react." "Why Easter weekend?" "Because his family will be busy. They won't see it coming." Is that strategy or coincidence? Linda smiled, the kind of smile that was not actually a smile. Both. The Friday before Easter weekend in 2026 was April 17th. It was also 2 days before my cousin Marlo's son was being baptized at Grace Covenant. It was also 2 days before the entire Kessler family would gather at my parents' house in Worthington. I did not tell Maddie that. She did not ask. We both already knew. I sat down at my kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon in late March with one of Bridget's yellow legal pads. Hazel was at a birthday party 2 streets over. I had 3 hours. I wrote it by hand first. 4 pages. I wrote what I had seen at the Mother's Day dinner in May 2023. I wrote about the bruise on Maddie's wrist. I wrote about Daphne flinching at the table. I wrote about Jonah's posture at the 4th of July barbecue in 2024. I wrote what Jonah had said to my daughter on Thanksgiving 2025. I wrote what my father had said to me on the phone in late January 2026, asking me to sign a different affidavit. I did not use adjectives. I used dates, times, who was present, what was said, what I observed. I typed it up that night. Linda Esposito reviewed it on Monday. She added 2 clarifying lines and notarized it on Wednesday. By the first week of April, my own sworn statement was attached as Exhibit C to Maddie's ex parte filing. My father had asked me to sign an affidavit. I had signed one. It was just not the one he wanted. The first time Maddie cried in front of me was at a Panera off Sawmill Road on a Wednesday night in early February. She told me about the first time Garrett hit her. She told me about the year she stopped sleeping. She told me about Jonah crawling into her bed at 6 in the morning the day after a bad night and saying, very quietly, "Mom, I think Dad is sad." She told me about leaving. The day she finally left in February of 2024, she packed 3 suitcases for herself and the kids while Garrett was at work. She drove to her sister's house in Dublin. She did not tell anyone in the Kessler family. They found out in a group text from Garrett that read, "Maddie has chosen her own path." She told me she had been waiting, every day of the 4 years before that, for somebody in his family to ask her if she was okay. Nobody had. I said, "I'm sorry, Maddie. I'm so sorry." She said, "Why are you sorry?" I said, "Because I had a bruise on my own wrist file open in 2023, and I told myself I was projecting, because I'm a single mother and a paralegal and I didn't ask." She said, "You're asking now." That was the first time she cried. Maddie put me on a FaceTime call with Jonah the second week of February. He was 10. He looked exactly like his father at 10. He sat at his mother's kitchen table in Dublin and held the phone with both hands. I said, "Hi, Jonah. Do you remember me?" He said, "You're Aunt Vic." "That's right." He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Are you scared of my dad?" I considered lying. I did not. "Yes," I said. "A little bit." He nodded, solemnly, like that confirmed something. "But," I said, "I have something he's more scared of."